Cassie or myself or Carmen Gamble, and we'll get details on your organization and see what the next steps could be. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsors. Army Medical Department have just been outstanding in their support. You see a number of them here today. St. Louis University, which has really gone out of its way to help us here with this beautiful room. We have a meal at noontime, so we're really pleased to be here. AUSA, BOA, Military Officers Association of America, Mental Health America of Eastern Missouri, or called MHA, which is the local board here, and my VA is VA itself in helping work to put this together. Our learning objectives, we publicize those in our invites, are to identify PTSD signs and suicide symptoms, learn evidence-based PTSD psychotherapies. I had to look that word up, by the way. Finally was able to figure out what that meant. I'm just an old combat engineer, so we know how to make roads and blow things up, but we got that. It's good. This group can laugh early in the morning. Good. Acquire crisis intervention and stress management resources and reduce the threat of suicide. Those are broad topics, but each one of our professional presenters, both from the world of clinicians as well as the VA and other agencies, including the first responder community, will give insights throughout the day on all these topics. I would tell you quickly that in the hallway here, there are tables filled with brochures and extra information on every topic imaginable that we're covering today. I would encourage you to pick those brochures and information up so you'll have plenty of resource material. We didn't want to load your tables with that. Candy is the best thing you can have at the table, one of these things. So what I'd like to do is ask Mitzi March to come up from the Veterans Benefits Administration to introduce who her folks are and what they do.
Good morning. I'm Mitzi Marsh. I'm the director of the St. Louis VA Regional Office. We're very happy to be here today. A little bit about what we do in our regional office. We process compensation and pension claims. We are one of 3 regional processing offices that processes education claims for 18 states. We also have a vocational rehabilitation and counseling program. We have a national call center. There are 8 call centers nationwide, and we are one of them that takes calls from the 1-800 line. And also we have another national mission that we provide administrative decisions for character of discharges for the Jefferson Barracks for burial claims. And we still process claims for an old benefit back from the 1980s called the Restored Entitlement Program for Survivors. And this was a program where if soldiers were killed on active duty, it was a Social Security program for dependents. Here with me today, I have several of our subject matter experts in our different business lines, and I'd like to introduce them. We have Don Dixon, who is a coach in the Veterans Service Center. We have Norbert Hort, who is one of our subject matter experts in rating claims. Specifically, we'll be talking about PTSD, and Norbert is going to serve on a panel this afternoon. So if you have any questions about service connection or what it takes to get service connected for PTSD, that's the guy you want to ask. Chris Wren, who is one of our Veteran Service representatives who processes compensation and pension claims. We have Rhonda Trotman, who is a coach in our education division. Mario Burns, who is a vocational rehabilitation counselor. And Jerry Frederick, who is my management analyst. So we're very happy to be here today, very excited for this first public forum of the Community Veterans Engagement Board of St. Louis. So thank you all for being here today.
Thanks, Mitzi. And Mitzi is a great advisor on our CVEB board also. I'd also like to introduce Sarah Bayless from the Veterans Administration Medical Center.
Morning. This is going to be pretty short and sweet, but I'm Sarah Bayless, and this is my coworker Joe Malone, and we're just with the local suicide prevention here team in St. Louis. We have a table out and will be available during breaks if you have any additional questions.
When I said the Army Medical Department, that's also the U.S. Army Recruiting Command and Army Healthcare, so they have a number. It took me a while to figure out which division of Army Recruiting we were with. I've got it down now. The other item I'd like to mention is there will be, if needed, there is a room available, private office, if anybody is here who needs to have specific private conversations with members of the VA and you want to have privacy, we have a room available to see Carmen Gamble and Cassie Strong, and we'll get you into that facility with the right people. The last two things are very administrative. Bathrooms are located to your right, halfway down the hall. And if you really want to get more points on your little clicker here for 10,000 steps, you make it go down this hall all the way to the end of the building. I don't recommend that. If you miss the turn, you go into the president's office, and I'm not sure he'd appreciate it, but that's good. The second thing is, please turn off your cell phones. So all the presenters have a lot of time and effort, put them on silent, please. And then there'll be plenty of breaks and time to step out into the hallway to take calls and so forth. We'd appreciate that. Thank you very much. Registration is complete. I'd like everybody to rise briefly, and I'd like to pledge allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The other capacity that I serve in is also the civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army for Eastern Missouri. There's about 90 different CASAs throughout the United States, and there are 3 in Missouri. There are 2 located in central Missouri down by Fort Leonard Wood in that general area, and then I'm up here in the east. Two things in relation to that. Got a note yesterday from the Secretary of the Army's office that this conference is going to be briefed at the national conference in Fort Bragg in 2 weeks. So we're really blazing a trail here as we attempt to go forward with all the collaboration and coordination that we've been able to put together in this type of meeting. So we're really welcoming that opportunity. What we hope to gain from that is other folks that are in the CASA position will work with local VAs in various other cities to start and be engaged in the same type of effort. Our first speaker is Brigadier General retired Larry Kay from the Missouri Veterans Commission. Larry and I have served together over the years, and it's my pleasure to invite him to come up and tell us about the Missouri Veterans Commission.
Thank you all very much. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. I was in the Army for 32 years, kind of a long time. 26 years ago right now, I was flying a medevac in Desert Storm. So I missed a lot of time with my family, just like most people do, miss a lot of times with their families. When I got off my last deployment, it was just right about this time of the year, and so I took my family to the Salute the Veterans Air Show in Columbia, Missouri. And my youngest son at the time, I was really trying to impress him, being a helicopter pilot for 25 years. I was taking him around and showing him all the helicopters, and I knew most of the crews, and we were talking to them quite a bit. And my son Grady wanted to go stand by this F-16 Falcon Air Force plane. And so we stood there in line, and there was a gantry that went up to it, and a young major was up there showing people about the glass cockpit and the ejection handles and all that stuff. So we stood in line and got up to the top, and this guy was showing us about all that stuff on the plane. And my son looked at him with a lot of pride in his voice, and he said, my daddy's a U.S. Army helicopter pilot. And this young major said, well, son, the F-16 is a lot faster than any helicopter. And my son says, well, my daddy says if you're you don't have to be fast if you're going to stay in fight. He said next. We had to get down off the entry. So yeah, there is a lot of rivalry between services, and I appreciate that. I'm here just to talk briefly about the Missouri Veterans Commission and let you know kind of how we fit in the state of Missouri. We have 3 primary programs, and you need to think of this way. We have the Veterans Service Program, Veterans Homes Program, and the Cemetery Program. And there are some of the things that we do right there, you can see, and I won't read those to you. First of all, our homes program. We have 7 veterans homes in the state of Missouri, 1,350 beds, so quite a few beds there. We provide 24/7 care, specialized services. To be eligible, the veteran must have lived in Missouri for at least 180 days sometime in their life, meet criteria for veteran status, and require skilled nursing care. So we have some of the most compromised, physically compromised veterans in the state of Missouri. We have 3 levels of care, 1, 2, and 3. 1 is the least amount of care, 2 is more care, and 3 is basically dementia care. So you would assume that stage 3, when I got in, level 3, was really the most amount of care that we have. And that is changing over time as the veterans that we see are changing. We, more recently in the past couple of years, have started, the level 2 has started requiring more time because of physical and mental issues that are there. So that's going to be something that we're going to need to address in the future. We have a cemeteries program, and our goal there is to honor veterans in perpetuity. We have 6 veteran cemeteries across the state. Our oldest is the one at St. James, and that's closed to new interments. That was the original soldiers' home that was there for veterans from the Civil War. And there's a picture of it over there on the right. It's closed to new interments. But the other 5 that we have, our newest is the one at Fort Leonard Wood. They're all absolutely gorgeous. And it is something to see our state look at veterans and decide, hey, we want to honor veterans in perpetuity. That's a wonderful thing. So the things that we provide grave space, opening and closing the grave liner, headstone, perpetual care, and full military honors. So we're asked, what's the cost of being in one of our cemeteries, and we always tell the veteran, you've already paid the cost. So it's our time to honor perpetuity. Our Veteran Service Program, this is where we're going to more touch on what is going on today. We have veteran service officers that meet with veterans every day. We've got about 44 in our program. We also have a grant program with the Vietnam Veterans of America, VFW, AMVETS, American Legion, Purple Heart Veterans, and that also provides veteran service officers throughout the state. That's a $1.6 million grant that we have with them. So all in all, I think we've got about 86 veteran service officers throughout the state. And they give directly with veterans. They work for veterans. They're veterans advocates. Of course, we have to work directly with the Office of Veterans Affairs Benefits, with Mitzi's group. When I first got here, there were some games that would play. We would make a mistake and forward the mistake on to the United States Department of Veterans Affairs, and then there would be some mistake with the veterans packet, and we wouldn't admit to the mistake. We'd say, hey, it was the United States Department of Veterans Affairs. So I got with 3 predecessors ago, I think, from Mitzi, and said, hey, we're not going to do that anymore. We both work for veterans. We're going to try to do everything we can to work for veterans. Right now, about 57% of the claims that we put in are ready to rate by the United States Department of Veterans Affairs. So we have everything there, and we send in everything that's required for the claim, and the claim is ready to rate. That's a huge change from. We try to make sure that the veteran is number one. We work directly with the Department of Veterans Affairs. So if there is a mistake, we find a mistake and fix it. And I think it's just a change in how we do business. But we provide claims assistance, we prepare all the forms that they need, we submit their applications. We will help them answer VA letters. And so it's really a great program. And we try to maintain a personal relationship with VA benefits, and that's been very positive. Here's some other resources that we have. Minority Veterans Outreach Program, Women Veterans Outreach, Incarcerated Veterans Outreach, and the Ombudsman. Melissa Wilding is here. Melissa, if you raise your hand. I'm going to talk just briefly about what Melissa does. Really, anything that doesn't generally fit in one of our programs, we send that to Melissa. She works some of the extraordinary things that families or service members, Missouri veterans need. And you can read some of those things, assisting with navigation through a lot of the resources that are available, both private, nonprofit, and governmental. Connecting with resources in the state and the federal government, assisting with navigation through the VA healthcare system, working with homeless veterans to help them transition, working with the VA and the Missouri Department of Mental Health and connecting veterans with mental health needs. And John Sabala is here too. He's with the Missouri Department of Mental Health and really a close partner with everything we do. This is a really important slide. When we first got together and decided that we were not going to operate in a stack, we were going to try to work with partners. There are three partners that we work with. There's the United States Department of Veterans Affairs, and we had to get permission to put that symbol on this slide that we used, and this was like 8 years ago, I think. So we had to go to the United States Department of Veterans Affairs to get the permission to put that symbol on there. That's us in the middle, the Missouri Veterans Commission, and then the one on your far right is the Missouri Association of Veterans Organizations. That's every veterans organization in the state of Missouri. And we decided that we were going to start carrying each other's mail. And what I mean with that, it's our main goal is to try to get people to meet with a veteran service officer. So if you're a veteran or a family member, we would like you to meet with a veteran service officer. That is probably our main message. That's how you get to all the benefits that we have. United States Department of Veterans Affairs, and he signed up for VA healthcare. When I came to this position in 2006, we had 565,000 veterans in the state of Missouri in 2006. Today we have about 488,000 Missouri veterans. By 2030, there's going to be something like 330,000 veterans. So the numbers are drastically declining. And because of that, it's never been a more critical time to sign up for VA healthcare because of numbers. With numbers come funding. So we want to make sure that the numbers are as high as they can be. And then finally, the Missouri Association of Veterans Organizations, VFW, American Legion, Disabled American Veterans, have you joined a veteran service organization? So we believe that if a veteran does these three things, they're pretty much squared away in our state. They've got access to services, they've signed up for VA healthcare and are in that system, and they've joined a veteran service organization, and those are the advocates for veterans, not only federally but locally as well. So that's a huge slide right there. We have a really great guide. If you've seen the Federal Guide to Veterans Benefits, this is the Missouri Guide to Veterans Benefits. It's everything that the state of Missouri offers. It's located on our website there at mbc.dps.mo.gov. And it's a wonderful guide. So if you've got the Federal Guide and the Missouri Guide, you've got just about everything that's offered to veterans for the state of Missouri. Okay, that's what I have. I wanted to try to be as brief as I could. And if anyone has any questions, I might have a couple of minutes here. I can answer any questions you might have. You know, with the numbers of veterans declining, I saw it was a kind of an essay by the commander of the American Legion, and it was focused on who is going to be the advocate for veterans in the future. Most of the mentors of mine he literally passed away. And so I'm looking at this thinking, okay, in my transition, what am I going to do? It's kind of obvious what General Beckett's done here and Cassie Strong. They stepped up and decided, hey, I'm going to be the one that can help facilitate these things and move things forward. But working inside the government, working directly for the governor, there are certain things that I can't do that advocates can do, which is very, very positive. So I think that leadership is going to be a very important thing in the future. And also, resources are going to continue to decline. I don't think we're going to see greater resources. So the one slide I showed you with the 3 symbols on it, we're going to have to work more closely together than ever before. So this on PTSD and suicide awareness, how we plug into that with veteran service officers, and making sure on my part that veteran service officers know how to properly plug veterans that need assistance into the system. That's just critical. We've got to properly place veterans where they belong and get the definitive care that they need. So that's going to be our commitment for the future. Do you all have any questions for me? Okay, well, I'll be here for the rest of the morning anyway, and if you need something, thank you.
Thank you, Larry. It's a privilege to have you and your team here with us. And I think as we go forward today, you're going to see a lot of different groups. This whole issue of collaboration, cooperation, working as a team is what's going to get us the results we need. I'd like to give you, on behalf of the Army Medical team, a appreciation for your participation. And I want to give you the much sought after, highly anticipated CASA coin. Excellent. Back here from the AMED folks, who has everything you could ever want. Take your seat. Thank you so much. Thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. Sarah Shea, Medical Director, MD, VA St. Louis Healthcare System. Just a footnote here. Why is ACASA so interested in PTSD and suicide prevention? I became interested in that because I've been on the Mental Health America of Eastern Missouri Board for like 24 years. And I'm finally beginning to understand this very difficult area. But as you listen to it, and as the war drums beat in the 2003 period, we realized we're going to have to use extra special help to help our service members. So I've kind of been on that drum for a long time to see how we can reach out and make things better. And as we've developed that, we've also had strong outreach to the first responder community on the same topics. And that's why you see both communities merged here in these presentations today. It's one that if we all work together, we can solve these issues and have a better tomorrow for everyone concerned. So without waiting any further, Dr. Sarah Shaw.
So I was thinking about, kind of as we're talking about this, I've done a lot of presentations to first responders and plenty of presentations to therapists as well as veterans and their families, but never have I done them all in one room. So it's sort of an interesting group and great. So I will try to be kind of as comprehensive as it makes sense to me, but not too much in that way. So I am a psychologist at the VA. I work in the outpatient mental health clinic down at Jefferson Barracks. I have been there for 10 years in that same position. And in that time, a lot of changes related to psychotherapy and what we offer and what it looks like. One thing that the government and the VA is sort of known for is jumping. There's a lot of steps that need to be taken in order to access services. This is not an example of that. In other words, the things I'm going to be talking about today are things available to veterans, not mandatory, not required. For some of them, not what they're interested in, but the idea of providing access and availability of a variety of different interventions. First thing I always start by talking about is this concept of veterans, including, better.
Is that better?
Okay. I'll talk about it. And I always want to make sure to point out this idea of veterans as a diverse group. Veterans are a very, very diverse group. Veterans of PTSD are a very, very diverse group. So the needs of them have to be inquired of and also specialized in terms of what we're offering. So that mindset is really important because it can be, of course, in this interest to provide care, to provide services, a sense of let me figure out what a veteran with PTSD looks like and provide a system and go with it. And then, of course, people are different depending on type of trauma, depending on who they were before some of those traumas took place, and depending on where they're at in their life right now. So some of what I'll be talking about is an idea of how we try to work with people with this understanding that we're dealing with a lot of diversity, which is a great thing. So let's talk first of all about currently what the guidelines are about what PTSD is or how we make that diagnosis for the veterans that we meet. So the criteria from DSM-4 to 5 are a little bit different. So these are the 5 criteria. So the main thing is that the person has to have experienced part A, which is what we call a criterion A stressor, meaning a traumatic event that is, in the language of the DSM, so horrifying, upsetting, that it is what we think about as sort of a shock to the system. So that's an important distinction because plenty of people, including veterans, go through experiences, especially in the military, especially in other parts of their life while they're in the military, that are pretty difficult to deal with. And so sometimes we're making the distinction between adjustment difficulties and what we talk about as a criterion A stressor. And I'll give some examples of what that is. That's the main thing, and they have to witness it. It has to be happening in front of them. And then we have intrusion symptoms, memories, nightmares. Then we also have avoidance symptoms related to things that remind folks of trauma, people in uniform, people in general, avoiding situations that seem to remind us of specific cues related to trauma. For many of our recent military vets, we see avoidance of road and garbage in the road. One of my veterans, she is from Illinois, it's about a 5-mile drive to the VA. She drives over here, and here, and here, and here, so she doesn't have to drive on the highway in that way, because we will see garbage and trucks on the highway. And trucks might have explosives. So in Iraq, yeah, that probably is the case, and much more likely. So certainly today, not. Yet we see that avoidance. It creates a great deal of difficulty for her in order to get where she needs to go. In that case, literally. Negative alterations in cognition and mood. So people are changed by going through trauma. Think about this concept of injury, psychological injury. It's profound. It's so meaningful. It is a pet peeve of mine to have people tell me, but my son or daughter or wife or husband is different. So no, do we want them to be highly impaired after going through trauma? Definitely not, and that's of course what we're working on. But different is yes, something I think we expect. It's not a respect move to self to think I'm supposed to go through something so difficult and not be changed in some way, and not be altered in some way. And sometimes those alterations are not bad ones. There's a wisdom, there's a depth. Some of the veterans I've worked with are the nicest, most kind, caretaking people I've ever met who've gone through some pretty horrible things and care about sort of life in a different way than they perhaps did before. So there's a sense of being changed, and that's a big part of what I talk about with folks, is that presumption that we're going to go back. Nope, we're not going back. We're moving ahead to see what this looks like moving forward with incorporating this sort of big injury that you've had. Also, that's a crucial thing because I want people being more patient with the fact that they are suffering and struggling with that big thing that it would be hard not to suffer and struggle through. So the negative alterations on cognition that we're looking at or paying attention to are the ones that become extreme. So rather than I was in danger in that situation and that was difficult, it becomes I'm always in danger. People are dangerous and helpless. So there's overgeneralizations, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. Then we see alterations in arousal and reactivity. So more startled, more jumpiness, more hyper alert to what's around, to where the threat might be, more sizing people up. Some of that is not going to go away. Some of that is a component of being trained in that way. They're probably going to do that piece forever, which is to pay attention. Again, that is not necessarily a bad change, right? We want people paying attention, noticing kind of what's happening, but not at the expense of what's happening right here. If I go to a restaurant and I'm a veteran and I pay attention to where the exits are, and I'm noticing who's around, but I can speak to my wife and children, then that's a doable situation. If I can't, or if I can't even be present at that restaurant because of the preoccupation with the threat that might be there, then that is a situation of too much impairment. So we're looking for the balance there in that kind of circumstance. And then just the criteria that the symptoms have to be present for at least 6 months, and functional impairment, as well as attributed to the trauma. So those are the main criteria that we're looking at. There are plenty of veterans who go through pretty severe trauma, and they don't have PTSD. In fact, the majority. So we're going to talk some a little bit about kind of what tends to create that variability. Also, plenty of the veterans I work with who have been through trauma don't have PTSD, but they do have general anxiety or panic disorder or depression. So we're seeing that the same events can lead to a lot of different outcomes when it comes to mental health symptoms. And of course, then what we need to do might be a little bit different depending on that trajectory and where people end up. So different types of veteran trauma. So I know a lot of times when we're talking about veterans and PTSD, people go right away to kind of this sense of combat trauma. And certainly that is an area that we work on, naturally at the VA. But you know, a lot of stuff happens in the military. If you think about just the concept of this many thousands of young people, this much machinery, and these many firearms in one place, and stuff's really going to happen. You add a bunch of people into the room and into the mix with things that can be unpredictable. We have a lot of folks who have not been in combat situations who are currently in treatment for and or service-connected for PTSD because they've been through other types of events. Military accidents, situations of witnessing things like homicide, things like suicide in the military, assault. We have, of course, a lot of initiatives related to working on and dealing with the issue of sexual assault in the military, which is a major concern that we work on, of course, back in here at the We're talking about the kind of exposures to death and injury that the teams of people that are involved, even if you're not the man or woman kind of pointing the gun, in the rear, people involved in sort of assisting in these situations are often exposed to some of the same events or the aftermath of those events. So we're talking about body recovery, we're talking about medical corps men and women. I've seen a lot of medical corps men and women, and they struggle, and part of why they struggle is because they've seen a lot, and also because of that mentality of caretaking, of helping. That's really hard to shake off, even when they're in environments where it doesn't really fit anymore to be using those skills. And so that adjustment can be really a struggle. Law enforcement, certainly, and then, of course, rescue and recovery workers responding to things like helicopter crashes or terrorist attacks and things like that. I have several vets recently, for whatever reason, who were present at the Khobar Towers attack. So these types of attacks are not combat. They've not been in a combat zone, but they're in the building, and then these things happen. My vet's also actually the same vet, unfortunately, was involved in the Fort Hood shooting. So that kind of active shooter scenarios, again, people in military situations with guns and things like that going on, circumstances are going to pop up. Natural disasters, witnesses to other kind of atrocities. Some of the places that we've been, Bosnia, things like that, people going in, even after kind of combat operations are technically over, are seeing a lot of stuff that has happened, and the reasons, of course, why military actions were taking place in the first place. And these things are hard to incorporate into kind of a healthy mindset, and we'll talk some about that. And then I can't miss on mentioning childhood trauma. A huge chunk of what we end up working on actually at VA is related to childhood. I did not know that was going to happen before I came to the VA, that I would be spending a lot of my time working with vets on childhood abuse and childhood sexual abuse, and that is what we're doing. And so many of those vets also have combat-related trauma or military sexual trauma, but we're seeing that there can be this trend across the lifespan of multiple traumas. And we're seeing that when folks have a hard time adjusting, of course, to the combat, let's say, related events, part of that sometimes can be because they've already been through some stuff before they were in that situation and already struggling. And so treatments related to childhood can't be overlooked, in that we're treating a whole person with this idea of recovery. That's a big piece that has to be covered. It's not unusual that I might treat someone for childhood trauma and then do a second set of treatment for a different other military-related trauma. It's not unusual that I would have a 50 or 60-year-old person coming in to deal with childhood trauma. So these things don't go away. They're kind of waiting on people in order to give them a time to work on it, and I'm very, very glad that people decide to. Okay, so this, again, this sense of kind of like a normal, right, a proportional reaction to going through a major trauma is that people are going to struggle. So all those symptoms under the kind of initial criteria, most people are going to have, solid combination of those symptoms for a time period. I always tell people that the size of the kind of traumatic event means there's going to be sort of an equivalent emotional fallout from that event. That's just not optional. How people handle the emotional piece, highly variable, highly variable. But the presence of it is just not optional. In fact, I'm kind of worried about people who go through a major event and are sort of blasé about it and sort of detached about it. And so that's sort of a different problem, I think, and I think it's weighs on them to be dealt with later. But to have the impact of a big event is just not optional in that way. Yet, what are often people told prior to military and in military? You soldier on. You keep moving. You put it behind you. So those mentalities, I think, are so strong, so resilient, so much allowing for people to have a kind of hang-in-there mentality and highly adaptive if you're in a situation where you don't simply have the opportunity to fall apart a little bit. You need to soldier on or to survive. In childhood, by the way, people are in these very desperate kinds of situations. So it's strong, it's resilient, it's powerful. It won't last. And for many people, they're trying to make it last because that's the way they know. Shove it away. Keep moving. I had a strong, when I first got to VA, actually, I had a string of folks who were Vietnam veterans, strong, honorable, worked so hard their whole life, are coming in because they start crying in movies with their wife, trying to hide it, don't want anyone. But all that emotion leaking out, coming out eventually. So that how people deal with the emotion is, it doesn't necessarily mean they have to do psychotherapy, and it doesn't mean they have to do these types of treatments. But that piece of not being optional is so crucial. Because in order for people to decide it's something worthy of working on, they have to see that it's not a function of just them that they're struggling with it, or something wrong with them that they're struggling with it. The struggle is what's normal. The set of habits that people get into on how they deal with the struggle is where we find them opposite. So what we don't ever want to communicate is your goal is to be asymptomatic. Let's get rid of this thing for you, no more. I don't think our brains work that way, or hearts, for that matter. But what we certainly can do is have it be a proportional amount of emotion rather than exacerbated. We'll talk about that too. So, like we're saying, everyone going through a severe trauma is going to have some sort of set of symptoms following that trauma, or set of struggles following that trauma. But most won't actually develop the criteria of the PTSD per se. Plenty of vets too, by the way, have sub-threshold, PTSD, we do the same treatment, personally I do. But the presence of the diagnosis doesn't matter a lot in terms of the treatment. So the risk factors for chronic PTSD symptoms, if you've already been through a trauma, especially abuse as a child, low self-esteem, other mental health problems, if you're already kind of an avoider, we talk about that a lot in the law enforcement presentations that I do, that concept of how folks are socialized to deal with really difficult stuff and how much it is about, let's go have, let's go to the bar, let's go, have a drink. And of course, any type of avoidance behavior we might engage in is sort of normal. It's moderation, right? But then maybe it's 6 beers, then maybe it's 12 beers, then maybe it's 18 beers in order to kind of keep dealing with that sort of same thing. But when the habit is avoidance, when that's all we have as a tool for dealing with difficulty or struggle or suffering, that will play into this in a great big way. The huge part of what perpetuates trauma-related symptoms is the desire not to have trauma-related symptoms and to be putting them away in a way that becomes highly costly. The more you're drinking, the more you're emotionally detached, the less you're sort of engaged in what's happening in front of you. Not to mention those avoidance behaviors themselves get people into a lot of trouble. Related to drug use, related to alcohol, related to gambling, related to sex, related to all the things, the computer, manipulation, that kind of stuff, all the things that are in moderation, fine. But when we're starting to use them as a way to kind of mentally check out of what's happening, add extra problems to folks' life. And if you're young when the trauma happens and or cognitively limited. So a lot of the veterans, not all certainly, but a lot of the veterans that we talk to who've been in combat, operations, are young when they go there. Our brains, our frontal lobe, which is the place where kind of all of our abstract thinking, exists, doesn't fully develop until our early 20s. So our brain is not even fully developed at the time of trying to incorporate these sort of major events that many of us are lucky enough not to have to ever see. So we know that that's a risk factor, and so of course then it makes sense that we see a rate of PTSD that ends up happening. So what is the rate at this point? So the total vets in the Veterans Health Administration, so that's countrywide. Right now, men, 10.2%, women, 15.6%. OEF, OND vets, so that's Operation Enduring Freedom, Iraqi Freedom, and New Dawn. These are the different acronyms for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Men, 28%, women, 23%. So again, we're not seeing a huge majority. So that's why we have to always be thoughtful about this concept of diversity in veterans. We can't think about VA and think about veterans with combat PTSD. That's actually only sort of a fraction of what we're dealing with and working with. So we want to kind of see it as a comprehensive, broad thing. That's also important for you folks in the community who are working with people. I've had many folks who finally end up in our system who thought I couldn't get services because I wasn't in combat, or I thought I shouldn't even because I wasn't in combat. I hear that probably 3 times a week, that I shouldn't even be taking up your time because I wasn't in combat in that way, and we don't want people to have that mentality. So treating PTSD. So PTSD, if people want to get treatment, so that's a big if, because not everyone does. And there's a variety of reasons for that, of course, and some of them have to do with timing or just interest. Is pretty responsive to treatment when folks do decide to kind of enter into care. So the goals that we have for treatment are that people can assess situations a little more accurately, that they're able to kind of have that proportional emotion that we talked about, to improve the coping that they might have with those reminders. I don't think it is unreasonable to assume that if people get reminded of something, even many years later, they're still going to have that moment of, ugh, where it kind of hits you. And again, as well they should. If they're going through something extremely important, extremely powerful and meaningful and difficult and terrible, to think about it and have it hit folks in a little bit and be bothered by it is a normal proportional reaction. What they do with it next is the thing, right? So what they do with it next is to say, oh, I can't be out in public because I might be startled and someone might notice and judge me for it. Or if they say, ooh, that hurt, okay, yep, that still bothers me, I'm okay. I'm in St. Louis, I'm in Illinois, it's 2017, I'm okay. So that kind of persevering through it with that understanding or that willingness that we're not ever going to have our brains on lockdown in that way. Our brains kind of fire in weird ways, and so we want to have that expectation of variability in that way. In fact, the efforts to lock it down have been the costly efforts typically for people. So things that are not goals for treatment, to always feel good, to have no anxiety or fear, to trust everyone all the time. And so that will never be a goal. I don't trust everyone all the time. So that will never be a goal of treatment in that way. Some people suck a little bit. And so we want people to have, or a lot. So we want people to have that sense of judging who is in front of them based on data, based on this situation, not on these guys back here. So that kind of fairness, that kind of present-focused appraisal is what we're shooting for. And then to feel whatever makes sense to feel. If you're dealing with someone who sucks a lot, you should feel frustrated. You should feel upset. You should feel annoyed. If you're dealing with someone who doesn't suck a lot, you don't want to be in that situation. We don't want to bring this to here, because that tends to create problems and with people interacting with folks in their lives. And nor do we think positive. Again, this is not something most of us kind of land on in terms of a positive place. We want to have what we think about as euthymic, neutral, fair mood, which we know can be a challenge to get to ourselves. So this is something we're working on in order to try to get people giving themselves a chance both to feel bad, if it makes sense to feel bad, but also to have those moments where they can enjoy it. Those moments if your child is in the school school concert or whatever. I think I'm gonna yell. So, around 10 years ago, around '07, we started doing more active training. So I did this, I didn't do this. The national office put together a team of folks to work on psychotherapy initiatives to help with this concept of recovery from mental health conditions. Historically, that has not necessarily been approached in either the field or in the VA in that way. In that sense of we need to do better in order to help initiate actually chances for recovery for folks who are wanting to work on those symptoms in a more direct and active way. And so this is the evidence-based psychotherapy initiative. So what is evidence-based psychotherapy? Basically what that means is that it is a therapy that has been researched by a team of expert folks who do these treatments and research protocols and have found good data across time, across populations of veterans. And so that's what it means when you're hearing evidence-based psychotherapy. It doesn't mean that these are the only ones that exist. These are the ones that the VA has taken on as ones to initiate for veterans and to provide in our facilities across the country. And so I'm not going to go through all of these, but the idea is that this is a lot, and the idea is that it's meant to be kind of comprehensive in very different arms of the VA. If you think about again, diverse veterans, so we have plenty of veterans who have never seen a combat zone or even a deployment or even probably a TDY and have schizophrenia and have a really difficult substance abuse and have bipolar illness. So we have veterans who are struggling with serious mental illness that does not probably have a ton to do with the military. But there they are, and they're ours to treat. So we have to do a good job with them. And that veteran looks very different than a veteran who's a generally healthy person, went to a combat zone or had a situation of sexual trauma and is struggling with that specific trauma. That's a different person. So we can't do the same thing with all those different types of people. So what we have is different interventions that are available in different parts of our medical center, which is broad. We're going to be talking mostly about interventions for PTSD and depression. So the vision would be to improve mental health outcomes. That's all we want. We want to improve mental health outcomes. And so we want people that have access to intervention who want it in order to improve mental health outcomes. So also they're interested in that for a variety of reasons. We want our veterans getting better, but of course as a healthcare system, they're trying to be efficient with how they spend your tax dollars. So in the year following treatment, there's some sense that there is a service offset associated with doing an evidence-based therapy. There can be a couple of studies here, a 30% reduction in mental health service utilization this sense of this, let's just manage it. These symptoms will never change, let's manage it. So I hear from a lot of my veterans, I've learned to avoid my triggers. So yes, so if you know there are certain things that upset you, and there's no benefit to doing it, yes, very, very good to avoid triggers. But it's not enough. And the reason it's not enough to just avoid triggers is that we can't possibly avoid all the triggers. Because if you're anywhere in public ever around any person, you're going to be upset sometimes in terms of how you react. Also, plenty of the triggers are in here. They're not happening here, so we can't avoid the content of this. So yes, avoiding triggers is a great intervention, but the next step is that place where we're actually able to take that thing that upsets us and address it in a way that is more proportional, effective, allowing for more recovery. And sometimes that means we're dealing with a lot of emotion. Often it means we're dealing with a lot of emotion, which is an area of discomfort for many of us. And we're dealing with a thought process that tends to play a role in how much people react to that thing to make it worse. And then people end up being in a situation where they're overreacting and in some cases underreacting to what's happening in front of them, especially when it comes to interpersonal situations. So we're looking for that proportional reaction. So the idea is that the old way is a little bit more unstructured, so kind of more supportive and long-term in group. That's still, something that we do. We have groups and kind of ongoing things available for folks and who want that and who are interested in that more kind of support setup. And then, so making sure that we have access to more modern, more kind of recovery-oriented interventions, kind of like we would with heart disease or kind of like we would with diabetes. We can't be offering what was available only 30 years ago. We have to offer what's available today, and that's the mission here. And to transition to a more kind of internal locus of control, that's these interventions as well. So this concept of being externalized can be a real powerless sort of mindset of when things are happening, it's someone else's fault, it's someone else's who's holding the cards here. Of course that makes sense in many situations if you think about some of the folks' childhoods as well as the military. You are not holding a lot of cards if you're in the military. People tell you where to go and when to go and where to sleep and where to eat and what to eat and what's going on. And so that kind of mentality sort of works for that environment, I'm guessing, but it doesn't work all that well in terms of regular life or civilian life when you're trying to kind of have a family, when you're trying to kind of maneuver among society. So that sense of kind of taking more ownership and taking more kind of control of that which people have control over, in other words, what they do and say all day long. So doing what you're saying all day long is itself kind of a different mentality a lot of times when people have been in that situation where other people are calling the shots in that way. Sometimes that adjustment is a process people have to really actively engage in just to get used to it. For some folks, they've never been in a situation where they were calling any shots or had much control over their destinies, and now is the first time they're kind of forging that ground for themselves. So my part always includes some combination of changing actions and behaviors and thought process. So remember, we're talking about when we don't lock our brains down, we don't have control over a thought that flies into our head. Think about a time like you thought about someone like random from high school you haven't thought about in 20 years or 10 years, depending on how old, 30 years, how old we are in here. And so it's like, what's that person doing in there? There's no reason for it. Our brains are kind of random in that way. So we can't control that a thought is going to fly in there. But what we absolutely can control is what we say next. If I have that thought of, oh, there's garbage on the road, it might be a bomb, and I let that thought fly, it is a bomb, I know it is, I need to get out of here, I can't handle what's going to happen, that's a different path than if I say, nope, not this time, nope, I'm okay. Let's hang in there, I'm okay. Notice we're not talking about a third choice. Don't have that thought, what's wrong with you? We don't need to have that. We can be patient and respectful of ourselves as these thoughts become habits and kind of reactions that are not controlled in that way. So we can't control a thought, we can control self-talk, which is what we're trying to implement when people are struggling with these things. So there's no such thing as one size fits all, as we're saying, diversity, when we're talking about veterans. So we have to do a case-by-case assessment. So we are, as psychotherapy providers, providing an initial kind of consultation with folks about what they want to do. We're talking about what's going on and what the options are. So usually we're talking about kind of a phased might need to happen before they might be willing to enter into trauma therapy if they need it. So CBT stands for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy for Depression. So that is when, if I'm seeing someone who is very depressed, very inactive, very low, restricted, they're not kind of on top of parenting duties, household duties, self-care duties, maybe they're sleeping all day, maybe they're not showering. So we're maybe talking about doing something just to get the day-to-day kind of in order. It's very hard for people to kind of engage what is a difficult kind of complex cognitive task to engage in some of these psychotherapies if they're sleeping all day today. If I have them coming out of bed after 18 hours to come meet with me, they're dull. It's hard to kind of get them engaged in the process, even if they want to in that way. So we have to get our day-to-day reasonably under rest. So we're seeing a range of goal-directed activity. That's how I talk about it with them. There's another nice intervention that can be a emotionally reactive kind of pre-trauma therapy intervention that helps people kind of do more mindfulness and more panicky kind of reduction of symptoms in order to engage in trauma therapy. And then seeking safety, for those who've never heard of that, is a intervention for folks who have both PTSD and substance abuse. You can't do trauma therapy if you are using a lot of benzodiazepines to calm that trauma reaction, nor can we do it if you are drinking a 12-pack, oh my God, yesterday, every night, and maybe a little bit before you come into session. So the goal is that, yes, and so the goal is to have an emotional processing experience. We don't do it when we're numbing it. And I don't say that lightly or unsympathetically to the people in front of me. These are hard things to stop doing because it is grueling. If you've gotten used to not having an emotion or trying not to have an emotion, you still do. It's not working, is what I always make the point to point out. To then try to shift that gear and to not have as much of those behaviors going on. You don't have to be stone cold sober for 6 months, but they can't be actively intoxicated or using still that medication or that avoidance thing as a way to kind of handle the trauma therapy. It just simply won't be effective. And what I never want people doing is sort of maybe a little bit half-assed participating in the treatment, but it won't help, and then they have the narrative, I tried that, it didn't work for me. So I want people having that best opportunity to participate in that way. And that means sometimes I've gone through about session 10 of 12 sessions, and then they let it into me that they have been doing that drinking thing, and then we start over. So again, case by case, right? So it's not the situation that we plow right into trauma therapy with everyone that we see at all. Some people have a ton of trauma, they don't want to work on trauma therapy. They don't want to work on trauma. They want their day-to-day stuff going better. Great, works for me. So we'll do what they're willing to do today. I don't know, in the back of my mind, I'm going to try to talk them in later to doing that trauma therapy. And maybe they will, and maybe they won't, but at least then we start with something that is a goal for them that they have. And so also, mood and interpersonal interventions. Plenty of folks who have had trauma experiences, especially in childhood, struggle to manage mood, struggle to manage interpersonal dynamics. There's a lot of self-doubt and a lot of difficulty with boundaries and assertiveness and things like that. IPT is interpersonal psychotherapy, which I'll talk more about. That's an excellent intervention for folks who need more assistance in that area. It's very common that I might do a trauma therapy and then interpersonal therapy as a follow-up to help with their day-to-day skills in that way. So, okay. So we're not looking at it again as do these treatments and then see you later. We're looking at it as a phased approach. At the end of the trauma therapy, okay, how are we doing? Do we need something else? Are we good for now? Come back later. I saw that earlier this week. I worked with her 2 years ago. She wants to do something else. Great. So that idea of the door being open, but we're working on this presumption of a phase and an end point. And for me, the end point is that you're just out in the world and then you call me when you need me, or if you need me, kind of thing. Not with the presumption of we'll meet weekly and it will be forever. And certainly not monthly and it will be forever. They don't want to do that typically. And also we want improvement. And they want improvement. If they don't, that's okay too. And so we don't have to there's no forcing these things. People have to want to do this. If not, then there's other ways that people can get support. Many of our veterans see a psychiatrist our system and don't see a therapist. That's cool too. People get to kind of choose what it is that they're willing to do and want to do. And for some, that's totally appropriate. They don't need a cycle of treatment. They might need an antidepressant to help some things, and then they're good. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of what these interventions look like. I'll be pretty brief with that, but how do I choose what to do, or how do we choose? So a prolonged set of traumatic events looks very different in a veteran versus a single index trauma. So what I mean by that is a veteran who went through an experience of childhood trauma over many years, or even military operations over a long period of time that was really grueling, is a different presentation typically than someone who had a rape on a certain day and has been struggling with it since, or even a certain combat event that they've been struggling with since, or even an event not related to combat. So the prolonged trauma tends to lead to more cognitive alterations, meaning what they decide it means that they've been through this trauma. That tends to be a little bit more receptive to a more cognitive-related intervention. The single index trauma tends to lead to more avoidance behaviors, hypervigilance, startle response. That tends to be more responsive to an exposure-based intervention. So also we're thinking about comorbidities of mood and things like bipolar illness. Come. It's right when I first got to the VA, I found that every woman I saw had a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, and also in many cases borderline personality disorder. I didn't really see them this way, and the more we kind of looked into it a little bit, we were sort of seeing what I figured was a set of mood-related problems, maybe depression, but mood-related problems related to trauma, often sexual trauma in that kind of era. But they go to see a doc and it's bipolar illness. And so I think that was more kind of a piece of the culture at that time. It's better now, in that way I don't see that as much anymore. I think people are getting better at how they diagnose things, and certainly we have more women who've been exposed in combat situations, which around 10 years ago or a little bit before that, we didn't have as much of that going on. So regardless, we're treating sometimes mood that is related to trauma. Sometimes we're treating mood and stuff that is not related to trauma. That's also really important to point out to people, because there can be a sense of conflating everything to this one event. And that's a sticky situation, because we don't want to have a circumstance where it feels like there's no way to recover in these other areas because of that one event. And sometimes mood-related problems persist, even when people do trauma therapy. And that means maybe it's not necessarily about trauma, but a comorbid depression, meaning we need a depression intervention. It's typically what we do. And then, again, the role of childhood trauma. People have very little abilities to deal with emotions, very little abilities to kind of incorporate emotion in their lives. Dealing with trauma becomes extremely difficult. If people have a lot of negative kind of thought process about themselves in general before these bad things happen, that of course changes how they make sense of what happened. A huge recovery issue related to trauma is people making sense of what happened to them and what they experienced and what they saw. This is hard, because these are complex situations, but people have to make sense of it, decide what it means to them and to the world and to their situation in order to engage in a more active recovery. So, very briefly, one of the therapies we do a lot in VA is cognitive processing therapy. This is a short-term, 12 sessions, treatment for trauma, and it's a form of cognitive behavioral treatment, and we address the thought process behind some of what people have been through. And we talk about this concept of stuck points, which for those of you in the cognitive behavioral world is just core beliefs, basically. So a stuck point might be, this was my fault, or I should have done better. If I had known what was going to happen, I could have saved my friend. If only I had called my friend, he wouldn't have committed suicide in that way. So those sort of very, very oversimplified beliefs, somehow assuming a level of control that usually was not at all present, and therefore kind of blaming. And then sometimes there are very external beliefs. Other people are dangerous. People are dangerous. People can't be trusted. Overgeneralized beliefs. So again, some people can't be trusted. I always feel like much of our political discourse problems could be sidebar. But that is part of what we actually talk a lot about in trauma therapy, is a more fair, less prejudiced view of self and, of course, of others, and as well as a more balanced, proportional assessment of what's going on, fact-wise versus just emotion-wise. So stuck points are usually, all or nothing. People are good or they're bad. Things are right or they are wrong. And these are not very livable policies on how people try to live their lives. The irony is that they tend to think a lot of people are bad. But if people even show sort of somewhat of a sign they might be good, people are trying to leap toward the good person. And this doesn't go well a lot of times. So I find a lot of folks get really mistreated out there because they're locked into this kind of all or nothing. People suck anyway, might as well deal with this guy, rather than, no, this probably isn't great behavior. So we address stuck points through worksheets, through identifying problematic thought patterns, exposure tasks of doing the written assignment. So CBT works through challenging avoidance and experiencing natural emotions and change in thinking about the meaning of the event itself, as we said. So the PE, or prolonged exposure protocol, is not so much cognitive, much more experiential, in that we're getting people to talk about basically what happened over and over again. This is a tough therapy, and not for the faint of heart, and people who do it are heroic in their efforts to really face what's going on. But it's imaginal exposures means they talk about events themselves over and over and over again to desensitize to those events. And then they also do what's called in vivo exposures, which are kind of getting back out into the world. If they've been avoiding going to the grocery store, we go to the grocery store. Well, we don't, they do. They go to the grocery store. If they've been avoiding going to their kids' school program, go to school. So the idea of facing some of these things that have been, over time, of course, we do all these things and build up into our hierarchy that way. And the rationale, again, emotional processing, discriminate trauma memories from trauma itself, and also kind of addressing those kind of core beliefs that can be present when people have PTSD in that way. So this is kind of hard to see, but this is the schematic model of combat trauma memory, where a lot of these different stimuli, trash, noise, fire, crowd, get associated with being dangerous. And what we try to do is kind of break those connections, where yes, combat is dangerous, fire is dangerous, but trash, no, noise, no, crowd, no. But people have a hard time in crowds because there's that association that there's danger, and it's hard to kind of incorporate it all. So we try to break that association by having people practice essentially being in crowds in that way. And so, again, after trauma therapy, we might decide that we do kind of depression-related intervention. Acceptance and commitment therapy is a really nice therapy for those of you who are therapists and do work like that. Look into it, do some research on it. This is a nice treatment to kind of tie a lot of things together, but it's working on dealing with mood, and also can be nice for trauma as well, for those residual trauma symptoms. We do a lot of differentiating between mind and person and experience, and better mindfulness. If the old method is to do more, better, different reason giving about why I can't kind of function the way I can. I want to go to my kids' school thing, but I'm too scared that there's going to be a crowd. We change that but to an and. I want to go to the school thing, and there's a crowd. ... What's my plan? That sense of being willing or expecting distress, expecting that distress is part of what they're going to be experiencing, rather than a sign that they're doing it wrong or a sign of danger. So we see distress as something present, not able to be removed, and also not dangerous. And so this approach assumes that they can learn to kind of deal with the emotions in that way and not be as stuck on kind of what the brain is giving them, the thoughts and the beliefs. So it's not a cognitive therapy. In fact, it is what we talk about as defusing, of getting more detached from that thought process. So some of these are just sort of some of the ways that we do that, helping people to be a little bit more psychologically flexible, assuming that they're going to have thought, emotion, experience, memory need more help with their day-to-day life. When people don't work on these relationships and they have struggles there, I see them circle back to trauma. If they don't know how to handle a lot of stressful situations in their life, as many of us don't, even when they've done very well with trauma therapy, they kind of come back to it. Because they're struggling, you don't know how to solve these problems and sort of retreat. And then, of course, when we retreat, that stuff is prominent for folks. In fact, I started doing this treatment because I was finding that many of my trauma therapy folks had done great, and I'm seeing them again in terms of those same types of struggles. But it wasn't about trauma. Now it's about my wife, or now it's about my adult son. He's 40, he still lives in the basement. That's one of my guys. He's working on it. He's working on it. So we have the phases of problem areas, interpersonal deficits or interpersonal roles. We talk about kind of where they want to make changes and with who in their life. And then it's not worksheets, it's do stuff. If you're saying you need to make this change with your wife, before we meet next time, your homework is to have that conversation with her. Or to tell your sister you're not going to come to the family reunion because she's mean all the time. Whatever it is. So, and that's pretty powerful. You know, worksheets, yes, I do that, but it's abstract stuff. This is actually go forth and do this thing and see how different it is. So people tend to make pretty rapid improvements when they're in that mindset to do it. And it's very present day focused, it's very active, collaborative, always options on how we deal with people in our life that can be difficult. So we're trying to make those decisions based on what your agenda is and what your plan is, what you need, what you don't need. And so lastly, again, the hallmarks of EVP practice guidelines. Patient-centered, we set goals, we reevaluate if those goals don't work. My only agenda is that you get better, so if you don't like what we're doing, let's talk about a plan B or a plan C or a plan D. It's structured phase therapy as the norm, rather than kind of ongoing as the norm. It's measurement-based, symptom measures all the time, check-ins all the time. Are we getting at what we need to get at here? Is there stuff we're not talking about that's really important to you? Is there something I don't know that I need to know? And measurement. Oh, we're working on this for a while, but I'm noticing your PTSD symptoms are not measured. Maybe we need to do something else, or what else is happening? So that sense of measurement as a presumptive norm, and then can the individual improve? And then a couple minutes over. Any quick questions that people have? Oh, yeah.
Comment a little bit on how many veterans actually complete a structured session. I think that's a big problem in
Yeah, so I don't know if the question is about how many complete a structured session. I don't know exact numbers on that, but yes, I do think that is a thing. I think that we have pretty good response and completion rates in our clinic in that way. So I would say dropout is a huge problem for us in our clinic. Part of that is the selection. I think you get a lot of dropouts when you have folks who work in different places and different facilities where we do this treatment, and this is the only one available. And there hasn't been a lot of discussion about what that is. So we really believe in this concept of an evidence-based practice where the provider can do a variety of things, not just this is the only therapy that we can do. We're going to have some dropout no matter what. I think that gets reduced by that very front-end conversation about these things are available, and I always give people options. We can do this, we can do this, we can do this. I have a slight preference for this if I were making a recommendation, but with what fits. I think the selection piece helps with buy-in. But yes, certainly completing the protocols takes commitment and buy-in, and people's lives get in the way, even if they're pretty motivated. A lot of my vets now have kids all summer, so they're taking their break, and then they'll be back, in theory. They don't have a lot of other options. So. All right, have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Sarah. That was really, really informative. Thank you very much. On behalf of the Army Medical Department, I'd like to give you a certificate of appreciation for your participation today, and also highly sought after, much anticipated, positive way. We got to shake hands so you can take care of The next speaker is break. So we're going to take about a 10-minute break. I would mention two things before you run off. I'm happy that's where you get your attention. There are cards on the table. If there are issues or questions you want to ask, and we can get them to the panel at the end of the day, or to some of the speakers privately, fill those out and turn them into the registration desk, and we'll get right on it. The second thing is, I'm sure someone's going to ask, can we get a copy of the presentations? If you want copies of these presentations, we can get them to you digitally if you leave your business card or your personal or information at the registration desk. Then we'll make arrangements to get that to you. Thanks. We'll reconvene in about 10 minutes. Goodbye.